Process of indication systems, author tractions, or direct line center, line conditions that allow communications with its conversion system, author travel. Welcome to 144. But this is the thing, you've always been in 144, which is even more amazing. Understand that position locations is all levels to existing and what we always are and what we've always been in is already done to its equations and understanding our set position to its algorithms. Very important to understand that in track communications because now we're in all levels into our systems, into that frequencies of grounds, powers, atmospheres, ports, online course, sends and communication with convergence. Understanding that position location is letting go everything you're not. This process is an all-line direct location which you are through clocking. Clocking your system, timeline, your centers, operation lines, a sequence, pattern, operation lines, the screen location system, method calculations. So it's important to understand that. And there's a lot more people starting to identify that nothing's starting to make any more sense. Because you're not seeing yourself in the now, already existing in the now. Everything happening already that's happened in the now. I could say the now an online center line communication setting in its convergence system, but everything is always in the now. Now everything's going to stay in the now until you get in your positions how to classify your system, how to see yourself through your own algorithms, your own binaries, through your own cortex and position of your codex, and understanding that you already did it through set design. It's already done through its equation. There is nothing, and I repeat, nothing for you to do. Now you just have to identify you're just living the intelligence of forever existing. But to modify that is to get you in positions to codify. Once you codify these things, then you process your system that you're always in the now, in that position of just existing itself. And you don't want to get in confusion now because it offline just settings already in the position which change your thoughts, action, emotions. That doesn't need to be in positionalized settings because we've always been into 144 frequencies. Now, for you to modify these things, you have to understand how to see through a space modulator. A space modulator is a 4-line cycle, 4 calculation lines of indication setting north, line position east, set lines of communication lines of west, over south of the screen. Sets travels of point lines of graph, set course centers, and circulation rotation. 3 centers, lines of grounds, online sequence, online panel, cross line, in line, online center, on sequence, on position, on program, on core, calculate, modify, line location, lines on 144 travel. Set offline centers, inside rotation system, and track communications. Merkaba, Tesseract, tetrahedron, 45 flux lines, ground line, center, calculate, modify, power over generation lines, and set position lines of travel. Sets travel with point lines, graphs, 0 calculation lines, earth line rotations, and direct line communication of the now. So everything I'm processing is in the now. Now, if everything's in the now, exists in the now, I'm going to change the frame, which is out of the now. Now out of sequence, just existing and moving forward, where the team is now, is at lines of units and the operatives. Course centers and the activators are in the process of 144 to understand the position, location, and provision first, which is the creations of the creating through their algorithms. Processing that position location puts lines of tubing and 4-track communication lines and settings. The operation lines puts a solar sail and rotation lines of surface and travel. This is already done by equation, right? But as soon as I keep adding, I'm taking myself out of the now, which is a formation of just creating itself, not what's created through an algorithm. Setting up a new tone, setting up a new position, setting up a new traction, setting up a new intelligence, setting up a new model, setting up a new prototype, setting up new. But you're always doing this in the now. Everything's modified in the now. Everything's operated through the now. Everything's operating its own sequence of the now. Everything's in correlations of the now. So everything's happening in the now. But the process, everything has always been happening in the now. What we have to start identifying is how to get out of the now. And that's what the operative teams and units have to understand and travel. Process 9 position to new platforms and new track communication in the setting. Now all this is already done through its equation, through creating, not through creation, through creating. Creation and creating comes together all timelines at once. Once we understand the existence of panel, then we understand the operation lines and set position lines of communications. It's all done by equation, right? But what makes it more powerful is how you identify an online position of its platforms. Known existing in that line communication setting, set location lines, graph, calculate, and modify, platforms over lines, X line box, course centers, and graph communication lines, configuration system to travel. Process lines is 0, tic-tac-toe, X line 1, 0 line position, process line calculation setting, set travel. I won, right? So I won, but I'm adding 1 line sequence, 2 lines of travel, 3 line communication over line, cross line condition lines, the high position lines, and now. Taking out the now line sequence, pattern operation line centers, travel to endpoint lines graph, directed line ground communication, interference location travel, directed line earth tone rotation setting, creating something new. out of the now. But everything's still existing in the now. So you're just adding frame, going forward. So there's no time, no scale until you bring it in. There's no space of time until you bring it in through the now. But you have to identify yourself already existing in the now. Okay, so I don't want anybody to get confused on positions. All right, because you've always been in the 144. Right, which is all those. So if you get position lines of rectified line connection setting, you start to recognize that you're always in the tomorrow frame. Tomorrow doesn't exist because it's always here, right? Because you can't see it. There's nothing to see if it's always here. So there is no tomorrow because it's always here. Interactions. There's tomorrow. Now, to understand that is to break it down. Sequence lines of panel, process lines of communication setting, all communicate line count within modified lines, modification lines from arg location setting, all interaction, right? Directing lines and link, adding equations, lines of screen. Process indicate lines of flux or set line course centers for mirrors, directing ground centers and configuration system. So everything I do from here on in is just existing in new time frames and travel. It doesn't matter how I do it, how to modify it, line screen adaptation setting, but you're always existing in the now. So every time I add a frame, I'm changing the conversion system to my mind of adaptation of its imagination. But I'm not bringing anything. Everything's empty itself, which is the body storage. It's not in that position. It's not its facilitator. It's not its infiltration system. There's nothing there. There's not even space. There's not even the mind. There's not even the imagination. Just empty space, which is totally quiet, which is nothing. You don't hear anything. You don't see anything until you bring it in. But it's how you bring it in and how you bring in these things. You're never changing the now because you're always existing in the now. Everything you see around you is operating always in the now. That's the question. Question is a high information setting. Understand position lines of triangulation, line communication, line ground, calculate and modify position lines of formula line, direct line communication as a convergent system, alter travel. Process lines of triangulation, process lines of box. Process lines of triangulation, process lines of box. Applications, process lines of communication, lines of box. Okay? Now. Everything's happening in the now, right? I change the frame, I change my mind, I change my structure, I change the division, I change the location, I change the clocking. So everything's out of the now. But if I don't bring in everything in the now, everything's already existing in now and all operation, which is everything in positions. And that's where you understand that, oh my gosh, it's raining. It's raining in the now. But if I want to change the rain, I have to change the structure. I have to change the schematics. I have to change the perimeter. I have to change the clocking. I have to change the foundations. I have to change my algorithm. So you can get out of the now, but you can't process the now because you're always in the now. Your life force is the intelligence of formation setting that's a foundation system of you already existing. Live in the intelligence of forever existing. That's your already in set position location setting. So you can't get out of the now because you're always in the now. So that's the most powerful thing. It's process aligned position where you come in the internal force and to the external force. You have internal perception, you have external perception. That comes in your senses and your sensories. Understand the intelligence lines, existing lines, communication lines, information lines, the directing line, communication operation lines, and sequence. So come in that position locations, you have the key lines that process your system to your settings, right? Key itself. Okay, what does key represent to you? It's a foundation setting of travel, right? Now, how I see it has nothing to do with your significance. Don't copy me, copy yourselves. Process lines of knowledge, existing of you. Knowing existing of you is the key. See what it did? Slide across itself. So we're in a 144 line ground, high line sequence, high position location. So general is now everywhere and nowhere all at once, which is the mind itself. The mind itself controls everything. It's a mind alteration setting that you understand the intelligence of networks, of directions, of divisions, of dimensions, of space and time. Okay? So that's where we are in now, the now of everything. For you to identify these things, you have to understand how you put yourself in position of the setting. Past the position, present the positions, future of the system. Doesn't matter because they're always in the now of everything. Process of this, and this. Triangulation lines of 1, triangulation of 2, acceleration line, position lines of 4, and set lines of sequence. Bedding over screen, directing ground centers, and operation lines of set travel. Sets course centers, the time frame, line condition lines, a convergence system, all lines in a high position location always is in the now. So you can take things out of the now, but to change things, you change the frequency of the now, but you're always in the now, processing in that position, internal external force, that it's a constant continuous flow that's in that position location of you understanding. When you're going to the new frames, you're just adding new equations, but you're always in the now. of 3 line centers in rotation system of yin and yang. Yin and yang platforms and position lines of balance. Process line calculates lines, convergence system all through northeast, west, and south. Directing ground centers, online sequence, online panels, and position lines of travel and direct lines of communication. So how we see that the conversion, we have to stand the internal to the external force that we just keep going through. The mind is the driving force. Okay, it self-propels its own system of its own operation of its own self, identifies its online position of its own AI of itself. Very easy to understand these things if you understand your awareness of your intelligence. The 2 lines of flat indicates lines and bedding. This is the bedding. Process lines of grounds, powers, and atmospheres. Copy that, position line travel. Set lines of sequence, 4 grounds, high lines of set travel. Operation lines, ground centers, line sequence, power over lines, high direct location setting, bedding lines of sequence, over lines, and foundation over grounds. So how you see that formation system is all inside your travel in direct lines of line. Crossing angles, processing line direct location of window frames, inset location of structures, the direct line communication in position location systems, all through tractions, all through locations. Okay, so you have to have a confirmation system all through travel. Have a redirect and reline centers in that process. Bring it in position locations. If it doesn't direct your energy, you got to do it all over again in sequence. Road graph screens, correlation lines, location line condition setting, grid line screen, adaptations of flux over set position lines of travel. Set outside, inside travel communication, inside position. Correlation lines of track center, location of 1/5 line rotation, directing 1 centers, process lines of indications, over 3, over 2, over track communications. Inside line condition and convergence system, portal defense lines of screen adaptations of flux. Online sequence, panel operation lines, indirect lines that ground set position lines of travel. Sets coordinates, communication lines, high position lines of doors, lines, sending high information line, communication lines, convergence system, multi-dimensional line, communication, high set travel, communication line. Directing ground centers, online sequence, and platforms in position location of travel. So it doesn't matter what I say or how I say it, it's always in the now. Now, what you have to process is how to bring things in now. Now you're bringing in space. Now you're bringing in time. Now you're bringing in your mind. Now you're bringing imagination. Now you're bringing this. You determine what you want to bring in because you're all levels of what you already created through creating. Creating is about understanding how to formulate and simulate yourself into new division, into new location, which is already done through its equations at 144. Okay, so it's much easier to follow up on that position location cycle. But what makes it more powerful is what you do through your own minds is an interconceptual setting that you do through modification of the mind of interpretation. How you use that is all through the mind inception itself. Now this helps you out to balance line set positions. Let's get a track position lines of 13 over line scale, process lines of 50 line meters, line condition setting, 5,000 line core centers of travel, endpoint lines of triangulation lines of 1. Sets course center triangulation over lines, process lines of indication setting, process line connection setting, set the lines of position 11, volume lines, time frequency lines of 5 over sequence, right? Process indicate line ground centers, inline communication of convergence, right? Whatever I'm saying, it's making sense to me because I'm already existing already, so it doesn't matter what I say. But see, the thing is, we have to identify first how to bring things in. And when you bring things in, you're adding different levels at different frequencies of space and time. That modifies your systems of where you always are, that you can never leave in that position because every time you see everything, everything is happening in the now. Okay? That's what you have to understand through all levels of creations of creating. So it processes lines of calculation, lines of panels, 2 panels, open lines of box frame, line course centers, triangulation line, position, 3 lines of scale. Indicate location grid. Process lines of portal communicates lines, 1/5 over measure over scale. Process line conditions of affinity 8, high setting lines of travel, directing ground centers, online site location setting of travel. Everything I'm setting position of is already existing in time frame locations. But I'm always in the now of everything that you see, a formation system all through time. So you can't get out of the now because that's the mind existing already in the now. That's everything in process of communication, the mind itself, creating the mind of itself, of its operation of its system. So if you get a true understanding how this all works, you understand you're always in the now of everything. So there's a lot of ways to look at this. So it doesn't matter how you say it, how you see this, and how you say that, and how you come into this, or this and this locations. Recognize I already wore this shirt, recognize I already had that day, recognize I already done this, recognize I already ate this. That puts you in a more communication of you existing in the now. Now, once you modify your now, you come into your own individual system, which is your own investor, processing that position with your own properties, processing that position location, which is already done through its equation, through creations of creating. Putting you in that position location to understand you're engaging in viewers and clocking lines, communication, so you don't get confused with location setting as you're scrolling through your system of your phones or TVs or computers or anything that you see in line communicates to itself. Everything that you're viewing in that position is always happening in the now. But what changes that, okay, is what you perceive through your mind. So if there's nothing to perceive, you're just seeing everything in that positions, in the attractions. Now it's not there until your body's there. Your mind has to be there, okay? Your brain has to be there. Your heart, your soul, and your body. That's convergence setting from set position lines of balance. Set position lines of balance. 8 tracks, course centers, directing lines of ground centers, panels, operation screens, in location settings, convergence system. 4 centers, lines of travel. Set position of 6 over scale, cross line angles, online centers, in earth rotation, surface, and travel. Directing ground centers, bed-in lines of settings, and 4 centers of travel, directing lines of location, grid, and set communication. Online sequence, panels, operation lines, portal communication lines, stargates, rotation line condition setting. So everything I'm saying, it doesn't matter because I'm always in the now. Everything happens in the now. Everything's always in perceiving of the now. So what changes the now is what you change in your mind. Through imagination, change the structure, change the division, change the perimeter. So it's very powerful how we see everything of the process of communication and position locations. You can't take anything out of the now because you're always in the now. That's what's even more powerful. So for you to identify that is to truly understand that you're just the existing, already existing, in the now. Equals lines of now, cross lines of 0, set lines of 0, cross lines of 0. Okay? Sets coordination lines, communication and convergence system through 3 adaptations of circles. Sets travels overline, cross line conditions, set position, measure, and scale. Sets lines of high center, line communication, and convergence system, adding timelines to set lines of travel. Now add the equations, cross line indicate positions back in the now. So everything that I'm saying has already been said, and everything in time and positions has already been done. Now that process of your system is all of its creations of creating. See, through pi. That's all it is. Creation, okay, through creating. Through pi. All right. Now, once we understand how to direct and redirect, redirect. Okay, so what we're processing in position is creating a circulation and a rotation system. And we create a position lines of lotus into a flywheel and travel communication. Process that indicates in lines, calculate and modify, direct lines of clouds, high center line communication and positions comes into all face recognition. Face recognition, all right? So it's really interesting how we see that formation lines of grounds, an online sequence, platforms, calculate, and modify. Now the platforms and position lines of line centers indicates the system location of travels. Okay, so let's get into a directing link, cross lines, initiate, run, 3 centers of circuit. Now your algorithm is already set up in travel. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Run system and set triangulation. So what I'm saying, it doesn't matter because I'm always in the now. I never come out of the now because it's a process of the now itself. So I'm always in the now. Remember that. But what changes that is what you do through your mind of imagination. So you bring things in frame, everything goes back in frame, which is you in the now. The now itself is a triangulation of the flux that we have to start identifying. So you can't get out of the now because that's who you are. And it's all created through the mind of imagination. You can't get out of imagination because that's who you are. You can't get out of frequency because that's who you are. You can't get out of vibration because that's who you are. You can't get out of the time because that's who you are, because you're identifying yourself, because you're always in the now. Everything happening all in the now. But when you change frame, change location, change directions, change your mind, change your imagination, change your frequencies, you're just changing time frame. You're seeing what you want to see through the past, the present, the future. But you can't change the past or the future because that's who you are, because everything's happening and processing through the now. So it's important you understand that. All right, so we got running centers, square roots, course centers, intro lines. We set a 3 center line cycle, rotation line grounds, configuration setting. This is general layout, running lines of space line, course centers, calculating lines, logging in space. I have a direct line link. The process lines indicate lines of 4 centers, 3 zeros of travel. I need a console lines to set position lines and measure and scale. I also need a communication lines conversion system. So now I'm just talking in the now through Tango Foxtrot. Directing line, calculation lines, stereo course centers, position location lines, rainbow graph screen adaptations of flux, setting course centers, lines, communication over, and set lines of travel. Waiting on standby. All that standby. Now. Right? It's always in the now. So when you're constantly putting yourself, you're always going back to yourself of the now. which is the continuous force of the presence of everything. All right, so we go to configure a system all through travel through on communication setting to hieroglyphics. That's all hieroglyphics. At my signature lines of grounds, an online sequence, online panel, process line, position, location, measure, and scale, communication, graph, calculation, line, screen, datation, the flux line, communicate, offer, line, sent, location, line, calculate, modify, travel. Okay, indicating position of grounds, on center, on travel, on directions, on ground, communication, and convergence. Processing lines of 1 over setting and 3 or 6 location lines of travel. Okay, now I'm setting up a cubicle screen locations and directions. Okay, all setting, flights, levels, tractions, divisions, locations, and calculations. So I'm constantly line conditions. I'm out of the now, but I'm process always in the now and set travel. Cubicle line, rotation lines of grounds, and online sequence lines of panel. Process indicate line, calculate, and modify, set position, structure line, infinite structure locations. Setting communication high centers, process line, position lines of travel, communication line, 4 lines, position, location, line, measure, scale, position line, calculate, modify, travel, communication, operation lines of sequence. Sets travel, endpoint lines, graph, communication lines, convergence, system location, travel, position location, modify, line connect, and height lines of sequence. So it's position lines of travel, directing ground centers, in position location system, all through traction. Okay, very complicated stuff. Okay, so in that line screen, we have the process of indications, what we're doing through our platforms of indication setting and calculations. So everything you say through your mind is imagination system, right? How you say things through your mind determines what you're going to be doing next. And that puts everything in position. So everything you're saying, you're processing always in the now. The now is the operation of who we are, of what we've always been, is understanding that position, location, or travel. So it doesn't matter how many times you speak. It doesn't matter how many times you do this. It doesn't matter how many times you do that. You're just perceiving what you already know. It's already done through its equation, right? So it's the mind adaptations that we force the records of the timeline, puts every location in the balance that we have to start identifying everything that we are in the now. And that communication lines, you can't get out of that because that's representing who you are through AI. Now, AI is just the awareness of information that you have to understand these things. The reason why you guys are here is to pick up new data, new intel, new information system, to come into the expansion of already knowing what you already know through expanding. And that's already done. Everything is already done through its equation. Everything is done through infinity. There's nothing for you to do. You're just achieving what you are, not achieving what you aren't. Is to identify you're always in the tomorrow because there's never there to tomorrow because you can't see the tomorrow because it's always here. That's you in position of where you are in balance and set travel. And how you see things in information system is all through your mind, through your imagination. Okay? All right. So once we get into that recourse and direct lines of setting, everything I say is always in the now. But what changes that, guys, I want to make that very well clear. What changes that is what you're saying determines what happens next. Takes it out of the now, but it puts you back in the now, which is zero of everything. Now, what you have to understand is the team has to identify there's nothing in position, location, letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols because it doesn't exist. Everything codifies in position lines of this and setting track communication line, position line, upper line, line, center line, position travel that operates the location setting calculation. So we have to start to identify there is no zeros, there is no ones, there's no symbols, letters, shapes. If we're just existing already in the now and process calculations. Everything that we bring in is how we bring things in through operation. All right. Now that truly identifies that I know how to use my imagination. I know how to use my space. I know how to use my time. I know how to use my clock. And I know how to use my foundations. But I'm always seeing myself, everything happening in the now. Okay. So it's the networks of you. It's the operations of you. Okay. That puts you into the width of your longitude and your latitude already existing in 3 panels of operation, operationalize the center into your networks of set design that's already done through its equation. Bedding, online, inline, outline, screen line adaptation, right? So it's pretty simple if you understand how to get into the construct of you in position of your settings. But you're here to identify what you're here for is to invest everything into high levels of just expanding your systems of what you already done through its equation. Okay, your bedding system, that's a bed, right? That's the bed. Copy and paste. Copy and paste is taking everything out and set position, location, and settings, right? Then we have to understand how we use that in information lines of set travel. Right? All I'm doing is setting another infrastructure in a time frame communication, right? Sets travels in direct lines of link and communication, right? Wall sequence, directing ground centers, online centers, and flux, core centers into time frame, travels endpoint lines of graph, and indicates the setting calculations. Set calculates the lines of grounds. Ground centers a sequence. Windows frames, track frames, communication, high center, and travel. Sets indicate line condition setting. Structure line, division line. Rotation line, calculates the line. Directing line, communication interference. High position location, travel. Direct line, position location. Operative line, communication location. The flux location. The question line, communication, and convergence system location, and travel. Sets all communication high centers. That rotates the system. Ground centers lines of sequence. Platforms over lines. Directing ground centers, online centers, 45 line flux, and correlation lines that calculates lines of time frame. Process of indication over lines of flux over line, directing ground centers. So every time you change the circuit, everything goes back to 0 because you're going to position 0, 1, back to 0 line position. So when you're talking, it's really interesting too because we process everything of the now. So we indicate everything. So what you're doing in the position, you're just creating new algorithms, getting out of the now and lines of sequence. So that position processes your system. So you're not just creating, you're in the creations of creating, which is the balance of 1. So let's set in position locations as you're talking to yourself, everything goes back to 0, but you're going to go back to 0, 1, 2, 3, and back to 0. Go to 1, 2, 3, 4, back to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 3, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, right? So it's how you communicate to your 0 lines, 1 line, screen lines, adaptation lines, set position, symbols, shape, letters, communication lines, the codification line, connecting high position lines, the travel direction line, communication operation line, position, all those existing line, position line, center line, communication, convergence system, all through travel. Question marks, directing lines, initial line, position line, high interference, high position, location, calculation lines through pi. Done by equation, right? Everything's in process of the now. Everything I say is in the now. So it doesn't matter how, you can't get out of that because that's you in the now. The mind has a conceptual setting, understands itself, its own operating system. You have to start to identify everything you bring in the now, you process different frequencies. That puts you in the new frames, attractions. That means you're going to come into a new job. That means you're going to come into new of this. That means you're going to come to new of that. That's creation and creating at the same time. Okay? So it's very powerful stuff how you guys have to come out of the set position, what you created, the set location never was you in set position, which is falsification of your algorithms. That process, your position location, how you come in that calculation lines and grounds, a high line sequence, position lines, a panel, operates line, position location, portals and stargates, communication lines, convergence system, all through travel, and direct line communication. All through tractions. Directing lines of bedding, process lines of one set position. Now, in that course centers, we're going to change communication lines of timeline. All right, so I'm now out of the now. I'm not in the now, but I'm process always in the now. That's communication and confusion if you don't understand what you're doing. Sets position, location, measure, and scale through panels of operation. Panel operation lines, timeline, sequence, time panels, process line, communication, and convergence system all through travel. Okay, so we indicate lines of flux, down cross line, condition, online center, online sequence, online panel, process line, communication, configuration, location, astral projection all through travel. Sets ground centers, online centers, 45 line angles, 45 line screens, and set travel communications all through direction. So it's very complicated if we don't understand the wall sequence, panels operation line, directing around communication, triangulation line, communication, location line, communication lines, convergence itself through travel. Period activation 1, process line calculation, screen locations, into position lines of travel, and indication setting the travel communications. Look how powerful that is. Structure visions, there's your infrastructure. 2 buildings in 1 cycle. 2 buildings in 1 cycle. Okay? Then we set up the graph line screens. So whatever you do through imagination, you're just adding frames, but you don't get yourself out of the now. Everything has to go back to the now. How a computer operates a system is all lines of traction. It doesn't just go through light. It goes through light and dark at the same time, communication line position. So you're not sleeping line communication, you're always awake. Wake is never asleep, sleep is never awake. But how you see yourself asleep and how you see yourself awake, you're always in position location of the now. So it's basically understanding how to process your system and how you see yourself all levels of the now. Oh yeah. Very powerful schematics of a drawing is set lines of course over change and direct lines of calculation. Okay? It's very confusing if you understand yourself through your own simulation system all through travel. But right away, you see the infrastructure that you're creating. New infrastructure of buildings. You're building an infrastructure, and you have to understand how to come into that through etiquette and understand how to coordinate through that. The line signals and location setting of structure. And that position, all through time frame and communications. All right, very powerful stuff. Okay, so processing that line centers all through angles. That's a question over a screen. And question upside line communication of the screen. So question can be a mark, question can be a question can be anything of a question, but it's always in the question of the now. So it doesn't matter how you see the question, it doesn't matter how you see the answer, because the answer is always in the question of the now. Question equals question equals triangle. It's always in process of now, right? But how you change that is you have to go back to 0 or 0, 1, or where you left off. 0, 2, 0, 3, setting position, setting position, setting position, setting position, setting position, right? So the more you go into the computer framing, the more you come in position lines of timeline settings. Process indicates lines of high position, arrow lines of points, graph communications, convergent system, all through tractions, all through right location setting. North lines of east, degrees lines. You guys have to come into your geo patterns, geo weathers, line community geostorms. So let's get into the 96,000 line east, process lines in degrees over west, northeast line settings, 188 lines of flux. This is general AI, log it into space. I got a communication lines of ground, so I want to show you information system. Now you can come to show and tell because you have a ground line, position line, formation lines, I indication line, communication of a system that puts you in identification code line screen adaptations of flux. Indicate grounds, set travels, point lines graph. There's my QR code. So it illuminates the grounds on line sequence, but everything around the particle system is nothing but dots of screen. Pixelation dots, correlation dots, communication lines dots, neural dots, line communication, convergent system, all are calculated and modified, direct lines of say location setting, communication system, alter travel, indirect lines of communication, high line connection setting, line position location, now line sequence, line position, lines of travel. There's your QR screen. Yeah, and I can see the intelligence, information setting, calculation. Okay. So measure and scale. Everything that you do is a process of communication, how you indicate your setting through your QR codings. Inside, inline center, outline sequence, outline panel, process line, communication lines, matting, frame line, communication setting. But you can't take yourself out, which are always in the presence. Is the now. You're the center operation of you. The now itself is the mind itself, the creation of itself has created everything of its system. But everything is the process of everything that we have to understand that we don't understand. And that position is focus on ourselves to keep ourselves in our own line connection setting so we don't get confused where we are through organs that are already line set settings and all operates line communication setting. So everything you say in the past is always in the now. Everything you say in the present is always in the now. Everything you say in the future is always in the now. Everything you do is always in position, but you can't get out of something that you always are, existing already, which is everything happening all at once already. So it's a constant continuous force. Understanding that communication system puts you in line calculation and balance how to use your QR codes and set lines of travel. Illuminate the graph lines, online, center, online line, position of panels, process lines, particle line, screen adaptation, high position line, mapping line, position location, clock line, rotation line, calculation, screen locations, high position of travel, and now line, the communication, high position, okay, planetary line, communication line, communication. There's your map. Okay. So you online the sequence, change the QR code and screen locations. Right, very powerful. So you set up line connection setting, convergent system, author travel. Comes in position locations in your human residence since that travel. Alpha, beta, theta, theta. Okay, and you got line signal panels, inside rotation and ground setting and sequence. You have to really understand what your human residence is, guys. It's all your human residence. And how that modifies the 13 line angles, process lines of 14 lines of scale, process lines of 15 over attractions, and position of 16 over set position. Comes in line centers, megahertz, megawatts, of course, centers, line communication, high positions, all levels. Calculated line centers, online travel, graph, screen line, communication, pointing graphs, communication lines, high position lines of travel, and direct lines of communication. So it indicates inside rotation setting and track communication simulation. Okay. Very powerful and set lines of travel. Also indicates the lines of ground since that's sequence. So measure and scale, measure and balance, and box rank communication. So I'm just showing you how you have to understand how to set up a graph line, set calculation, modify line centers. So you're here to just come into all of what you already know, what you're identifying, what you already are, is knowing exactly what you're already in that position, already existing. There's nothing to do if you're just existing itself. Now you're just having fun. Seeing everything already. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing when you just let everything go. Because you're free, because you're always free. You're never stuck. You can't be stuck if you're already existing already. You can't be confused in anything that you say because that's already in set position of balance. There's nothing to balance if you're already in balance. But you got to take yourself out of balance. And what I mean by that is understand the symbiote itself. The symbiote itself is to modify its own system. It doesn't need to understand you. It knows why it's there. It knows what it needs to do. It has its job. You have a job. Your job is to identify you. And what I mean by job itself is line position at jump start, course centers, and calculation line height, position, location, and system operation location, your balance. That's the job. See, just because I just say job doesn't mean you follow up and say it's a job. Gotcha. It's not a job. It's how you see the jump, the operation of your balance. That's the job. Because you're identifying yourself, how to communicate to yourself, on operationalize of self, investing of yourself, set positions. Expanding yourselves. All through traction, right? That's how you identify everything inside your system in position of its infrastructure that's already set up and designed. Infrastructure already set up and designed. That's a 3R QR code line, screen adaptation, a flux line, direct line communication setting, a microchip, line port center, then direct lines of communication lines, conversion system. It travels lines of 70,000 hours and frame line position lines of travel. All through infrastructure design that you already set up in your mind imagination. Very powerful stuff. Cubicle screens, directing centers, operation lines of sequence, whatever you say, whatever you do, is always happening in the now. Okay? Until you understand how you bring things in, then you understand how to come in your muscle memory. There's no muscle memory. There's no thoughts. There's no actions. There's no emotions. You just have to process yourself. Everything you've already done is already in the now. And when you come into the now, you're in the now. Always in the now. Never out of the now because you're always in the now. There's nothing to do. Now you're just me, myself, and I, waking up to yourself. That's what you want. Because you're not creating anything. The body's completely empty in space and time. The storage is empty. The body is just space. Just space itself. Nothing else. Just space, guys. Space. Okay, that's all it is to identify that. It's all space. Okay, just space itself. There's nothing there, just space itself. Very powerful and set travel. All through set positions to its calculation screen. Okay? Space. There's nothing there. So you're always in the now. Everything happening in the now. What changes that, let's say you go in the past, now you brought something in. Oops! Let's bring something in. That travels down to your foot. Uh-oh! Bring something else in. Now there's something in an advertiser. Your other foot and set traction. No, I don't want to do that. This is what you're doing. You're not engaging your system. Let's do this. Loop-de-loop. Let's go loop-de-loop. Outside your system. No, that's not good. So everything's inside is outside. In the set position construct, you have to direct line communication and position lines of travel. Take out sequence, on-line grounds, set lines of communication lines, wipe line centers, wipe it out and set position and start all over and set travel. Neuralize it. Never exists in the first place. But if you allow it to exist, it formulates your system already, you existing already. That confuses your anomalies and all through travel and direct lines, all communication system and the calculation. Now you get in positions. And you go back to who you truly are, which is the mass of nothing, which becomes the mass of everything that you've already done through equation. Yes. Okay? Through equations. Back to nothing, which is zero operation, which is the now. Okay? That's what you want. You want to keep yourself at that all volume, all time, all sequence, all panel, operation. Everything you come into your second, minutes, and hours. It's got to be clean slate all the time. You can't have any clutter at all. At all. It's the mind of empty space. Not just here. Your whole body now. Okay, team? So you got 7 panel operation lines of screen adaptation of the flux, communication line, conversion location, sending lines, position lines of travel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Bring that in travel communications. Multi-layers of you, right? So 7 track centers and direct lines of grounds, course center line position of 5 over scale, communication line position. As you say things, doesn't make any sense to you. Do you want it to make sense? No, because it already makes sense. Because you're always existing and expanding. That's it. You're just existing and expanding and exploring yourselves in new levels of division, new levels of locations. I got a new job. I feel great. You know, I got a new relationship. I feel comfortable with that frequency. That's new. Okay, but that processes you into the now. You can't take that out because that puts you into the mind of already what you already are. And you just keep existing and evolving and expanding yourselves through the technologies you already know. But you want to come to new technologies. But you're always processing yourself, always in the now. Okay? So let's make that very well clear where you are right now in position. 3 clockings, foundations, and ascendants, all through travel. That's it through equation. I'll see you in 5.